There is a silence in the halls of the Mechanicus that speaks louder than any clanging servo arm or chanting binary prayer. In that quiet, beneath red-lit vaults and cathedrals of logic-defying machinery, something festers, something not even the Omnissiah would sanction. Servitors, those lobotomized half-human work thralls, are disturbing enough. Men and women stripped of identity, slaved eternally to cogwork imperatives. But rumors whisper of aberrations far worse, amalgamations not only of flesh and steel, but of demonic essence and warp-forged hate. Servitors that should not exist, and perhaps by the standards of both man and machine, do not truly exist at all. This isn't just about mechanical monstrosities or heretical whispers from the Dark Mechanicum. This is about a line crossed in secret, where the utility of flesh and the allure of the warp meet in blasphemous fusion. Somewhere between the chirurgical cruelty of a magos biologist and the unpredictable madness of a warp sorcerer lies a truth so profane it must be buried beneath 1,000 lies. But the ashes of countless wars are beginning to stir, and in their wake, these impossible creations may be stepping forth. If so, they are not only a threat to the Imperium's body, but to its already shattered soul. To understand the horror of a demon-infused servitor, we must first stare into the abyss of what a standard servitor truly is. On the surface, servitors are pragmatic tools, a necessary compromise in a galaxy ruled by scarcity, war, and decay. They are created from the broken, the condemned, the discarded, criminals, failed initiates, battlefield wounded, and even political dissidents. Their minds are scoured clean, personalities erased through psychosurgery and lobotomization, and their bodies are surgically grafted with bionic limbs, cogitator interfaces, and labor-enhancing augmentations. What emerges is not a man nor a machine, but something eerily still, something that moves without desire and obeys without question. The Adeptus Mechanicus views this process not as cruelty, but as divine efficiency. To them, the soul has fulfilled its purpose and need not remain tethered to the flesh. The discarded human shell becomes a vessel for functionality, glorifying the Omnissiah by serving tirelessly and without complaint. It is a kind of martyrdom, perhaps, or so they say. But within the wider Imperium, the reaction is more mixed. Some see it as mercy, others as monstrous. What cannot be denied is that servitors are ubiquitous. They load munitions aboard starships, purge heretics in penal sweeps, conduct rituals in cogitator halls, and act as janitors in the great spires of Terra. Every flickering lumen and thudding reactor core likely owes its maintenance to a blank-eyed, skin-stretched servitor slaving in silence. Yet the boundary between tool and sentient being remains agonizingly thin. Some servitors twitch or weep without knowing why. Others emit fragmented vocalizations, broken remnants of their past selves. A few have been known to turn violent when their restraining implants fail, unleashing years of buried trauma in a paroxysm of rage and sorrow. These are not mere machines, no matter how fervently the Mechanicus preaches otherwise. Every servitor is a tombstone to a life that once was, a grave that still walks, still breathes, and sometimes still remembers. And that is where the real terror begins. Because once the soul is removed, what truly remains? An empty shell or a vacuum waiting to be filled? Across the Imperium's shattered remnants, there are those who believe servitors are more than vulnerable to possession. They are beacons for it. The absence of self leaves a void, and the warp abhors a vacuum. In some whispered rites, it is said that the emptier the vessel, the more suitable it becomes for occupation. Perhaps the servitor was never meant to be a clean slate, but a stage set for something far darker to take its place. But even without delving into the speculative horrors of possession, the ethical and metaphysical implications are chilling. The ecclesiarchy preaches the sanctity of the soul, but quietly blesses the use of soulless labor. The Mechanicus venerates the purity of logic, yet their creations often display ghost-like echoes of pain and identity. The Inquisition turns a blind eye when it suits their purposes, sanctioning entire battalions of servitors for battlefield use, even in psychic war zones where their blank minds become twisted playthings of the immaterium. This moral hypocrisy, this blind utilitarianism, is the foundation upon which the Imperium survives, and it is exactly that foundation which would make the fusion of servitor and demon not only possible, but inevitable. The culture is already one of dehumanization, of reduction, where people are input material and pain is a resource to be harvested. When viewed through that lens, the idea of a demon-infused servitor becomes not a break from imperial norms, but their logical and inevitable conclusion. When the Horus heresy split the Imperium in two, it was not merely a civil war of sons against fathers or brothers against brothers. It was a spiritual schism, a cataclysmic rupture in the very belief systems that underpinned the Adeptus Mechanicus. From that break emerged the Dark Mechanicum, not merely traitors, but heretics in the purest, most damned sense of the word. Their heresy was not confined to political allegiance. It was a fundamental rejection of the boundaries between machine and warp, between science and sorcery. And from that poisonous seed has grown some of the most obscene creations the galaxy has ever endured. While the loyalist Mechanicus clings to the rituals and canticles that placate the machine spirit, the Dark Mechanicum tore those hymns apart, replacing them with shrieks of demonic invocation and binary rites twisted by warp logic. They took the already disturbing template of the servitor, a broken human re-engineered for labor, and asked the forbidden question: what if, instead of wiping the soul, we replaced it with something else entirely? This was not idle experimentation. On the demon-racked forge worlds under their control, the Dark Mechanicum needed a labor force immune to fear, pain, or mutiny. Standard servitors were too fragile, too easily consumed by the warp storms that howled through their corrupted domains. What better substitute than a body animated not by sparks of mortal memory, but by the raw malice of the warp? So they began their rites, the melding of demonic essence into human remains and steel shells, not possession in the chaotic and wild sense, but containment, binding, engineering. These creatures were not born, they were forged. In the unlit factories of Xanasaku and the screaming manufactoria of Lucius's heretic enclaves, whisper spirits were coaxed from the immaterium and sealed within reinforced skulls. Some came from lesser demons, willing or not, lashed into compliance by arcane circuitry and scrap code glyphs. Others were shards, fragments of greater entities, distilled into data prisons and embedded within logic engines. The results were horrific. Gigantic quadrupeds with servo legs tipped in ritual steel. Vox grills that uttered only blasphemous recitations in languages never meant for human ears. Eyes that bled oily ichor, ever burning with hatred they barely understood. But it wasn't just about power. It was about control. The Dark Mechanicum isn't ruled by chaos, but by obsession, a lust for total mastery over the unmasterable. A demon bound into a servitor chassis becomes, paradoxically, more docile than a free warp entity. Its rage becomes energy. Its madness becomes code. For the heretics, this is the ultimate triumph, turning what should be an uncontrollable abomination into a programmable tool. A slave not just in body, but in soul. And not its own soul, but one it was never meant to possess. The fusion didn't stop at labor constructs. These demon servitors became tools of war, horror weapons deployed on corrupted battlefields. Imagine a siege cannon run by a cadre of shrieking multi-limbed servitor demons who bleed molten brass and laugh when they're destroyed. Picture a Mechanicus servitor, its scalp bursting with tiny screaming faces, performing surgery with blades anointed in warp oil. These aren't speculative myths. They've been glimpsed on the edges of real space, in battles near the Eye of Terror, in the aftermath of failed inquisitorial raids, in the deepest catacombs of Traitor Forge worlds. And perhaps most disturbing is this: the knowledge to create them is not confined to the traitors, because once the line was crossed, the blueprint was written, and blueprints can be copied. To imagine the anatomical horror of a demon-infused servitor, we must discard the familiar logic of biology and embrace something far more profane. These are not simply cybernetic abominations with a warp-tinged twist. They are hybridizations that defy nature, faith, and even the laws of reality. The flesh does not merely house the demon, it is restructured by it. The machine components do not merely channel function, they become ritual bindings, psychic cages, and conduits for demonic hunger. Every part of a demon servitor's body is a fusion of intent, techno-sorcery manifested in metal and meat. The starting point remains a human host, living or dead, most often lobotomized, mutated, or ritually prepared. The skin is flayed in specific patterns, not just to expose muscle for mechanical grafting, but to etch wards, binding sigils, and invocation marks directly into the dermis. These glyphs are reinforced with electro-sutures and data-etching tools that implant demon-suppressing scrap code directly into the servitor's nervous system. Not even the Necron's most blasphemous null hexes approach this synthesis of metaphysics and computation. The musculature is enhanced with vat-grown fiber bundles, soaked in warp-reactive oils harvested from demon worlds. The machine parts are not simply bolted on, they are grown into place using symbiotic alloys that feed on ambient psychic energy. Some limbs might be entirely mechanical, others a horrifying blend of muscle and bone restructured into biomechanical appendages. Joints pulse with unnatural elasticity. Pistons throb with what can only be described as metallic sinew. In some cases, the limbs display constant movement, twitching, clawing, twitching even in sleep-like stasis. Where a loyalist servitor's brain would be wiped and replaced with a cogitator core, the demon servitor's cranium is transformed into a prison. The brain is partially excised, but left just intact enough to act as a biological anchor for the possessing entity. Above it, an artificial cortex is layered, not to control, but to siphon. This core is a converter, translating demonic thought patterns into executable functions. The result is not comprehension, but obedience. The demon rages within, its essence repurposed into action by a machine it cannot override. The eyes glow not with implanted bionics, but from within, fueled by warp fire burning behind shattered irises. Some demon servitors have more than two eyes, others none, perceiving the world through entirely psychic senses. In some models, the eyes weep alchemical fluids or emit radiation in specific sigil patterns used to hex and debilitate enemy machinery. The vocal systems are equally perverse, multi-layered vox boxes grafted into throats that chant prayers in reversed Gothic or emit frequencies only demons can understand, or that drive humans to madness. Internally, the organs are replaced or reshaped into functions dictated not by biology, but by need. The heart may be a warp core stabilizer, thrumming with unstable energy. The lungs might vent corrupted incense or spore clouds of demon breath capable of seeding warp entities into the material world. Digestive systems become smelters or chem factories. Every part of the internal system is either discarded or converted to perform a perverse, often esoteric function. Power supplies are not entirely material. Yes, many are linked to traditional reactors, plasma cores, or electro batteries. But some are tethered to demonic energy loops, captured warp entities in auxiliary chambers that pulse with malevolent life. These backup systems allow demon servitors to operate in null zones or even phase in and out of real space momentarily, short-range teleportation surges that bypass armor and reason alike. And then there are the stabilizers, perhaps the most horrifying aspect. Demons are unstable. They cannot exist in real space unaided for long. So the demon servitor is constantly stabilizing itself, internal fluid systems flush warp taint like immune responses. Pain feedback systems punish the demon when it surges too far, and some are even linked psychically to a remote heretic or dark magos who exerts constant dominion through sorcerous oversight, a master binding the slave moment by moment, thought by thought. This is not engineering. This is ritual sacrifice made perpetual, a thing made not to live nor to die, but to exist eternally in torment as a tool. When we speak of machine spirits, we tread sacred ground. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, the machine spirit is not metaphorical. It is a truth, a living presence that dwells within each device, from the lowliest data slate to the grandest void ship. These spirits are to be placated, understood through ritual, and never angered. But this reverence masks a dangerous question. What happens when the spirit is not a benign echo of function, but something else? Something hostile, alien, and eternal? What happens when a demon replaces the machine spirit? This isn't merely heresy, it's metaphysical inversion. In the liturgies of the Mechanicus, the machine spirit represents harmony between man and function, a union that brings purpose to both. A demon, on the other hand, is pure dysfunction. It is chaos incarnate, a thing that does not build but consumes. So to bind a demon into the sacred casing of a machine is to commit a theological atrocity. It is to profane not just the device, but the very belief system that defines the Mechanicus. And yet, from a purely functional standpoint, the similarities are disturbing. Both machine spirits and demons inhabit non-material conceptual spaces. Both can manifest through machines, exerting influence. Both require appeasement, maintenance, and ritual to function optimally. The difference lies in their origin, one in the ordered patterns of faith, the other in the screaming disorder of the warp. And in that razor-thin difference lies a loophole that radical heretics have exploited for millennia. For a demon bound within a servitor, the machine spirit is replaced, overwritten, erased. But the structure remains. The rites are the same. The invocation chants still resonate. The heretic doesn't stop praying. He just prays differently. Instead of Bin-Harik hymns, he utters the canticles of change, of pain, of endless teeth. The cogwheel symbol is still etched, but it spirals, fractalized, mutated into unholy geometries. The demon, in turn, adapts. It learns to inhabit the machine like a mimic, fulfilling the roles expected of it with horrific precision. The philosophical implications are vast. If the machine spirit is a metaphorical lens through which humans interpret technological function, then is a demon spirit merely another lens? Darker, yes, but no less effective? Some radicals even argue that the Omnissiah and the Warp are not opposites, but twin reflections. That the Emperor's divinity, as expressed through machines, is a sanitized version of the same primal energies that demons represent in their rawest form. That faith in machinery is just another form of worship, and that it matters little whether the recipient is the God Emperor or a demon prince, as long as the machine turns. This is the horror, that demons and machine spirits may not be rivals but cousins, that the entire foundation of imperial technology is built on an assumption of safety that was never real, because the rituals work, the machines run, the prayers yield results. Whether the force behind those results is divine or demonic becomes secondary to the outcome, and in a galaxy collapsing into madness, results are what matter. And so, some servitors walk with a spark in their mechanical eyes that does not come from a data core. Some engines roar with voices not heard in any forge. Some circuits hum with frequencies that resonate with the warp rather than logic. The distinction between machine spirit and demon becomes not a theological one, but a functional one. And that is the most terrifying possibility of all, that we cannot tell the difference. Somewhere beyond the firewalls of sanctioned knowledge, buried in corrupted data crypts and muttering vox loops, lies a litany of warnings. Whispers from dead forge worlds, fragmented records recovered from derelict warships drifting near the Eye of Terror. Voices recorded in the final moments of inquisitorial kill teams looped endlessly on malfunctioning Pict recorders. The Imperium never speaks of demon servitors officially, but it cannot silence the echoes. The battlefield rumors, the garbled transmissions, the impossible sightings that slip through the cracks of censorship. Take, for instance, the fate of Forge World Griffon 4. Its fall to High Fleet Leviathan was swift and brutal, but some survivors reported seeing entities that did not fit any Tyranid profile, bipedal constructs with unclean geometries, humming with warp resonance and smeared in sacrificial oil. These were dismissed as hallucinations, trauma-induced misidentifications in the face of Xenos horror. But a single report, buried in the data archives of Ordo Xenos, cross-referenced them with demonological schematics. The match was uncanny. In the depths of the Jericho Reach, a Death Watch strike team encountered what they initially assumed to be corrupted servitors used by a renegade Forge enclave. But when the Tech Marine attempted to interface with them using standard Binharic protocols, the constructs responded in reverse logic, spouting hex-coded gibberish that caused seizures in the unshielded. Their bodies resisted meltifier, and their final screams were not mechanical but human, pleading, shrieking, layered with voices that did not belong to any known tongue. Then there is the cursed campaign on Morden Primus, where an Astra Militarum regiment tasked with purging heretic cults encountered constructs that appeared to be loyalist servitors until they began chanting in unison during a lunar eclipse. What followed was a massacre. The survivors described machines that moved with purpose, not programming, that flayed the flesh of officers and used it to inscribe new command protocols on themselves. The Vox recordings are still classified under Ordo Hereticus, vocal pattern, false canticle. Some accounts come not from the battlefield, but from the warp-wounded psychers who often see too much. Astropaths aboard rogue trader vessels have suffered spontaneous blindness after beholding what they called laughing machines on forgotten derelicts, humanoid constructs covered in sigils that warp and shimmer like living things. Even some navigators have described shadows with wires crawling over the hulls of lost ships, leaving trails of coppery blood and whispers in non-Euclidean languages. None of these stories are conclusive, all are anecdotal, but together they form a mosaic of warning, a signal buried in the noise. The Mechanicus does not acknowledge such reports. Any Forge world under suspicion of demon tech contamination is either sterilized or placed under endless scrutiny. But the truth is, not all of them are caught, not all of them are purged, and some heretic enclaves have perfected the art of hiding in plain sight, operating within sanctioned Forge worlds, masked by bureaucratic layers and false data rights, using experimental servitors as test beds for binding rituals too dangerous to perform openly. There are even accounts from the Black Ships, the dread transports that harvest psychers for the Golden Throne. Some reports describe servitors used aboard these vessels showing signs of impossible awareness. One supposedly turned to face a sanctioner during a moment of silence and whispered a prophecy in flawless High Gothic, a language it should not have known. The sanctioner killed it instantly. The recording was deleted, but someone archived the audio in a forbidden databank, and it has circulated ever since among the Ordo Malleus under the codename Red Sigil 3. What all of this suggests is not just possibility, but recurrence. These aren't isolated incidents. They are outbreaks, each one a scar on the skin of reality, healing slowly, but always bleeding again. And in that blood, in those scattered fragments, we begin to see the outline of a truth too terrible to voice, that demon servitors are not hypothetical. They are real, and they are growing in number. The Inquisition's relationship with the Adeptus Mechanicus has always been one of tension veiled by necessity. The Inquisition needs the Mechanicus for weapons, data, and arcane technologies few others can wield. The Mechanicus needs the Inquisition's silence, or at least its selective blindness. But when rumors of demon-infused servitors surface, that tenuous pact is strained to its absolute limits. Because what the Inquisition fears most is not the presence of such abominations, but the implications of their continued existence. The Ordo Malleus, the chamber militant charged with demonology and warp phenomena, is uniquely equipped to recognize the signs. Their interrogators and demon hunters have encountered war engines that defy the known limitations of mechanical function. They've seen constructs that resist banishment rites, that radiate low-level warp energy, that scream in voices unregistered by any vox logica. And while the official doctrine is extermination, there are always exceptions. Radicals within the Ordo, men and women seduced by the utility of chaos, view these demon servitors not as threats, but as tools to be harnessed. This secret war plays out in the shadows, far from the grand theaters of imperial conflict. It is a war of black archives and sealed vaults, of kill teams sent not to purge, but to capture, of experiments conducted beneath the bastions of Ordo strongholds, and the terrible consequences when containment fails. In some inquisitorial labs, demon servitors are held in stasis fields, dissected by sanctioned tech priests whose loyalty bends toward results rather than purity. The knowledge gleaned is fed into artificial cogitators shielded by hexagrammic wards, generating data that can barely be contained. But these actions are not without cost. Entire inquisitorial cells have vanished while studying captured demon machines. A research conclave on Histron's moon was lost in a single hour after a containment breach, the only clue a final voxcast of binary screaming that caused nearby Auspex equipment to self-destruct. The Ordo Malleus responded by declaring the moon excommunicate and glassing it from orbit. But rumors persist that one servitor entity survived, its warp signature tracked briefly before disappearing into the depths of Segmentum Obscurus. There are also whispers of schisms within the Inquisition itself. Puritan factions of the Ordo Hereticus have begun targeting their Malleus counterparts, accusing them of techno-heresy and collusion with the Dark Mechanicum. Raids on inquisitorial archives have revealed evidence of demon servitor deployment in contained war zones, places where victory at any cost justified the use of forbidden constructs. These revelations have shaken even the most zealous. When Inquisitors turn on each other, it signals a crack not just in doctrine, but in the spiritual armor of the Imperium. And then there are the rumors that some demon servitors are being deployed in secret campaigns, not just as experimental curiosities, but as operational assets. A radical Inquisitor may field one to interrogate a demon host, believing that only a creature of similar fusion can truly comprehend warp logic. Others use them in anti-psyker suppression roles, their null auras feeding off demonic entropy rather than blessed technology. There are even tales of demon servitor pairs, linked constructs sharing a mind across warp space, used to scout or assassinate at ranges beyond comprehension. Yet, despite all this, the greatest horror is not in what these Inquisitors do. It's in what they may inspire. For every sanctioned use, a dozen heretics are watching, learning, perfecting. The more the Inquisition tries to study or control these monsters, the more they validate their existence, and the more they teach others how to replicate them. Heresy, in this case, is not a flame to be extinguished. It is a plague vector carried in data packets and ritual blueprints spread across dead stars and hidden vaults. The Inquisition is fighting a silent war not just to destroy demon servitors, but to prevent the knowledge of their creation from reaching the wrong hands. But what if that war is already lost? To grasp the full scope of what demon servitors represent, it helps to look beyond the Imperium, to examine how other factions interact with similarly twisted constructs and how these reflect or contrast with what the Dark Mechanicum might be birthing in secret. Because the 41st millennium is littered with horrors born of fusion, flesh with metal, soul with code, spirit with hate. But few are as emblematic of this dark alchemy as the necrotech and demon engines that haunt the edges of real space. The Necrons, for instance, are perhaps the most chilling parallel. Their flayed ones are mockeries of sanity, broken remnants of ancient minds corrupted by the madness of biotransference and the curse of the Khitan. These entities move like predators but think like viruses, mimicking organic behavior in a grotesque dance of consumption. In many ways, flayed ones are the anti-servitors, not mindless thralls created from the living, but mindless predators birthed from immortals who should have known better. There are whispers that some in the Dark Mechanicum study their molecular phase fields, not for replication, but to cage demons more effectively. And what of the soul grinders? These chaos constructs are not passive vessels, but the result of a pact. A demon offering itself willingly to be bound within a machine, merging with infernal war engines built in the demon forges of the warp. They are the polar opposite of servitors in consent, but not in function. Like demon servitors, they are walking paradoxes, half mortal, half immaterial, bound by rituals rather than circuitry. The key difference is the degree of autonomy. Soul grinders retain their identity. They are not tools. They are weapons with motive. Yet there are stories, dangerous ones, of soul grinder tech being used by heretics to upgrade servitor shells. These experiments aim to reverse the process, not to house a demon in a war engine, but to trick it into inhabiting a form it cannot control, stripping it of purpose and chaining it to endless labor. In these unholy attempts, the line between Forge World and Demon World begins to blur. The Drukhari, too, play with horrifying blends of flesh and function. Homunculi covens craft pain engines, Talos constructs, and Chronos parasites, living machines designed to harvest agony and torment. Though not warp-based, these biomechanical abominations share philosophical DNA with demon servitors. They are meant not just to kill, but to feel while doing so, to feed off the pain they cause. The Dark Mechanicum envies this intimacy with suffering, and some have tried to replicate it using warp-sensitive nerve bundles and synthetic agony matrices. Even the Tyranids, in their cold alien logic, birth creatures like the Neurothrope, hybrid entities where the biological is fused with psionic dominance in a way that mimics demonology, albeit without the soul. In contrast, demon servitors are animated by too much soul, by a soul that was never theirs to begin with. And then there are the orcs. Mad as they are, mech boys have been known to trap weird gubbins inside their contraptions, glowing skulls, cursed glyphs, or whispering teeth. No one knows if these are true warp entities or simply latent psycho junk, but the parallels remain. Even in chaos, the idea of imbuing a machine with something beyond itself keeps recurring. All of this points to a terrifying truth. Demon servitors are not an anomaly. They are part of a galactic trend, the bleeding edge of a nightmare where the material and the immaterial are no longer separate. Necrotech, warp forging, pain machines. These are not isolated phenomena. They are converging paths, and the destination is a galaxy where every construct, from the most mundane labor drone to the most towering demon engine, may hide a soul screaming for release. The Eldar call it She Who Thirsts, Slanesh, the devourer of souls. But even before that unspeakable birth scream tore through their civilization, the Eldar understood the danger of fusing thought and essence with artificial constructs. Their psyche-reactive wraithbone is bound by spirit stones, ancestral souls granted purpose after death. In every way, their war machines are sacred and deeply personal. A Wraith Lord is not merely a weapon. It is an echo of a warrior who once was, given new purpose by the living and protected from the warp's hungry grasp. So imagine how the Eldar, especially the Harlequins and the Farseers of Ulthwé, would view the demon servitor. It is not just a violation, it is a mockery. Where they preserve the soul in crystal sanctity, the heretics of the Dark Mechanicum rip it out, replace it with something screaming, and weld the result into a machine of pain. To the Eldar, these constructs are a foreshadowing of the Mon-Ki's final doom, not a glorious end in battle, but a slow erosion of soul and meaning, until nothing remains but tools possessed by echoes of their own sins. There are records, whispered of in the Black Library, that describe encounters with demon servitors not as singular horrors, but as portents. One tale speaks of an exodite seer who dreamt of a forge world where the sun bled oil and the trees grew limbs of iron. In this dream, he was hunted by metallic figures with faces carved from the memories of the dead. Another prophecy, scrawled in madness by a solitaire who vanished after speaking it, foretells a time when the silent ones of the cog will scream in a chorus that shatters craft-world hulls, signaling the return of a sleeping god whose voice is static and scripture in equal measure. To the Eldar, the warp is not merely a realm of power. It is a sentient ocean, responsive, reflective, manipulative. Every action taken in real space ripples into it. So a demon servitor, forged of warp essence and material sin, becomes not just an entity, but a curse upon reality. Its very existence unbalances the skein. It creates nodes of dread, points in space-time that draw predators, not just demons, but psychic phenomena, parasitic gods and warp beasts that feed on despair. The Inari, with their focus on the cycle of death and rebirth, see demon servitors as stagnation incarnate. They are souls denied their end, neither evolving nor resting, trapped in unending cycles of torment. Worse, these constructs may act as anchors, keeping the dead tethered, unable to transition to Aeneid's promised resurrection. Some Inari warbands have begun actively seeking out heretic enclaves, not to fight for strategic reasons, but to perform what they call soul severance, rituals that destroy the bound demon and free the machine-bound spirit trapped beneath it. And the Dark Eldar? They laugh, not because they find demon servitors amusing, but because they recognize them. The homunculi once experimented with binding lesser warp entities into their torture engines. They failed more often than they succeeded. When they see demon servitors, they do not scoff. They take notes. To them, this is art. A crude, inefficient art, perhaps, but one with potential. There are rumors of raids not to enslave, but to steal blueprints, gene maps, and scrap code from corrupted forges. Ultimately, the Eldar do not fear demon servitors as military threats. They fear them as omens. In their long, tragic sightlines, these fusions are not signs of human innovation. They are symptoms of decay. Of a race so far gone into desperation, cruelty, and entropy that it no longer recognizes blasphemy when it builds it. To the Eldar, demon servitors are not a new enemy. They are a mirror, and the reflection shows only extinction. In the heart of every chaos cult lies a paradox, the desire for liberation through submission, transcendence through degradation. To them, the Imperium servitors are not abominations. They are templates. Templates to be perfected, to be exalted, to be made sacred in the eyes of their dark gods. For a chaos cultist, the idea of becoming a servitor is not a punishment. It is an initiation, a willing sacrifice of individuality in exchange for divine function. This inversion of values is what allows demon servitors to emerge not just from heretic laboratories, but from worshipful communities of the damned. In these cults, rituals are conducted not to summon demons randomly, but to guide them into prepared vessels, bodies surgically altered, mentally shattered, and aesthetically purified to receive the warp's kiss. Unlike the forced bindings of the Dark Mechanicum, these fusions are born of faith, blood, and eager consent. Some chaos covens maintain sacred manufactoria hidden in the underhives of hive worlds or in the shadowed corners of void ships gone rogue. Here the cultists sing hymns not in praise of the Omnissiah, but of the Prince of Excess or the Lord of Flux. Instead of incense and oil, they use ichor and entropy. Their servitors do not hum in silence. They moan, they chant, they recite the litanies of corruption with voices that once wept for salvation, and every cogwheel is etched with sacred profanity. A corn-worshipping cult might forge combat servitors driven not by programming, but by eternal fury. The demon bound within is not pacified. It is directed, channeled through pathways of aggression, driven to seek blood in endless loops of destruction. Some even reject the term servitor altogether, calling these creations living rites, holy acts made flesh and brass. Those who worship Slaanesh take a different approach. Their demon servitors are works of living art, delicate, grotesque, sensual in motion, and hideous in purpose. Their limbs flow like liquid steel, their voices a chorus of pleasure and agony interwoven. These are not meant for war in the conventional sense. They are distractions, corruptors, infiltrators. They sing opponents to madness or seduce machine spirits with corrupted Binharik until cogitator cores overload in ecstasy. Nurgle's faithful create servitors of rot, bloated, wheezing monstrosities that spread plague through contact, through song, through vaporous decay. They carry within them demonlets of pestilence, not to fight, but to fester. And when they die, which they often do not, they erupt into spore clouds of sentient disease that bind to metal and flesh alike. And Tzeentch? His cults produce the most volatile demon servitors of all, shifting, mutating, never the same twice. Their very presence destabilizes reality. Logic coils malfunction around them. Probability bends. Orders meant to command them are reinterpreted in abstract ways, often with unintended and deadly results. But in that madness lies brilliance. These are constructs of potential, the raw, unfinished sketches of what the universe might one day become. Even outside the Chaos Pantheon, rogue cults emerge that try to mimic the process. There are rumors of the Loxian Synod, a splinter cult in the Ultima Segmentum, who believes the Emperor himself was the first demon servitor, a divine soul bound into a rotting, entombed body of war. They create their own Emperor Saints, fusing astropaths with servo shells and infusing them with warp entities that claim to speak in his voice. What unites all these cults is a vision of transcendence through hybridization. They do not see a line between man and machine, or between soul and demon. They see only stages of becoming, evolutionary steps on the path to godhood or oblivion. And every demon servitor they birth is not a tool, but a sermon. A living message to the galaxy, written in gears and ichor and fire. Among the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the process of rationalization is not a luxury. It is a theological imperative. Every action, no matter how blasphemous it might seem to an outsider, must be justified through sacred logic, Binharik catechisms, and divine purpose. And nowhere is this more strained than in the minds of those tech priests who delve into the forbidden, who gaze into the warp not in fear but in curiosity. To them, the concept of demon servitors is not heresy, it is convergence. A spiritual and technological symbiosis misunderstood by those who cling to primitive definitions of purity. The core of this justification begins with the machine god. For radical magi, the Omnissiah is not merely the emperor or a philosophical construct. It is the very principle of perfection. Perfection cannot be limited to the material. It must encompass all dimensions, all energies, including those of the warp. To ignore the immaterium is to ignore half of creation. Thus, if a demon represents raw energy, potential, and psychic capability, then to bind one within a mechanical vessel is not to defile the Omnissiah, but to glorify him through greater complexity. Such tech priests often reinterpret the cult Mechanicus's central tenets. The phrase, "the flesh is weak," becomes not a condemnation of biology, but an affirmation that it is incomplete. Just as augmetics perfect the physical, so too must demonic infusions perfect the metaphysical. They see servitors not as labor drones, but as proto-avatars, initial blueprints for a future where man and machine and spirit are no longer discrete, but unified in purpose and form. Their theological texts grow strange, scrolls of twisted code that reinterpret standard Binharic into warp-compatible Enochian, liturgies that compare demon binding to maintenance rites, hymns that describe the screams of the bound not as suffering, but as divine harmonics. The pain of the host becomes the sacrifice of the martyr. The madness of the demon becomes the voice of truth heard too clearly. To such heretics, the demon servitor is not merely acceptable, it is necessary. The galaxy is dying. The Great Rift has split the heavens. Traditional technology, reliant on increasingly unreliable STC patterns and ancient knowledge, is no longer enough. The Omnissiah, they argue, would not demand stagnation. He would demand adaptation. Demon-infused constructs are not deviations. They are innovations, holy updates to a dying codebase. Some even go further. There are whispers of a splinter doctrine called the Iron Logos, a belief that all souls, mortal or demonic, are simply datasets waiting to be compiled, that the warp is a chaotic archive of corrupted files, and the duty of the Mechanicus is to reformat them into something useful. Under this belief, demons are not entities of malice, but misaligned subroutines, hostile AIs that can be debugged, reprogrammed, and installed into obedient shells. Servitors become test cases. Each successful binding is a step toward the ultimate goal, a galaxy of perfect harmony between machine logic and warp resonance. But even among radicals, there are limits. The cost is high. Many magi who attempt demon servitor creation go mad. Others become possessed themselves. And the constructs, while powerful, are prone to rebellion, corruption, or spontaneous disintegration. Yet even these failures are considered sacred. Every catastrophe is recorded, dissected, fed into massive noospheric simulacra to refine the process. Still, there are those within the Mechanicus who watch with growing dread, loyalist tech priests who have seen their colleagues vanish into hidden chambers, emerging later with strange implants, altered voices, and data patterns that ripple with warp energy. They know the heresy is spreading, that somewhere, in the red-lit sanctums of Mars or the fringes of Metallica, someone is rewriting scripture. And if the Omnissiah ever speaks again, will his voice sound like gears and steam, or like a demon's whisper filtered through vox static? Desperation is the most potent solvent in the Imperium. It dissolves principles, ethics, and oaths with equal efficiency. Under its pressure, even the most pious warlords and battle-weary generals have begun to reconsider what they once deemed unthinkable. The Imperium is collapsing, a slow rot from within, accelerated by the warp breach of the Cicatrix Maledictum, dwindling resources and enemies beyond counting. And in that twilight, the allure of demon servitors becomes not an ideological debate, but a matter of survival. What if a Forge world under siege for decades could use demon-infused constructs that never tire, never require maintenance, and operate even in the presence of psychic interference? What if a death world with failing infrastructure could deploy repair servitors powered not by failing plasma cores, but by self-replicating warp energy? When a hive city's last power grid begins to sputter, and a heretic offers a demon-powered generator disguised as a machine spirit relic, how many overseers would question it? There are confirmed, though always classified, cases where Imperial commanders have inherited units of servitors later revealed to possess warp resonance. Sometimes the evidence is dismissed as battlefield anomalies. Sometimes it's simply ignored. In one infamous campaign in the Vianarch's depths, a planetary governor employed what he called blessed laborers of St. Hexax, servitors with eyes like burning coal and voices that hissed static litanies. They turned the tide against a Tyrannid invasion. No questions were asked until years later, when Inquisition scribes traced their manufacture back to a vanished Forge enclave with known ties to the Dark Mechanicum. What complicates matters further is the rise of splinter factions within the Ecclesiarchy and Militarum who argue for functional heresy. These factions claim that if the Emperor is truly the master of mankind and the Omnissiah in truth, then all things, even demons, must ultimately serve his plan. This logic, while blasphemous to traditional doctrine, has gained ground in fringe war zones where resources are exhausted and hope has already died. On the front lines, pragmatism trumps purity. Astra Militarum regiments have fielded what they believed were advanced servitor patterns, only to witness those constructs laugh when wounded or pray in voices that caused commissars to collapse weeping. Navy vessels have employed machine tenders that sing in reversed canticles, yet systems remain functional. The choice becomes stark: purge the construct and face collapse, or let it continue and win another day. High Lords will never sanction these tools officially, but they do not need to. Bureaucracy shields heresy as effectively as ritual. A construct may be reclassified as subsection Magitech Auxiliary. Anomalous readings might be attributed to solar flare interference. After-action reports are edited, truth is deleted, utility remains. And then there is the possibility, whispered only in crypt vaults and deathbed confessions, that the Imperium has already created demon servitors knowingly. That somewhere in the depths of Terra, or on hidden vault forges, sanctioned heretics under inquisitorial oversight are crafting these beings not out of corruption, but strategy. They see the arcane horrors of chaos not as forbidden knowledge, but as untapped military assets. Because what if chaos can be used without being worshipped? What if demons can be enslaved, not bargained with? What if the warp can be caged? That question, in the Imperium's final days, may no longer be a theory. It may already be practice. They move through shadow and machine oil, their footsteps silent despite the weight of blasphemy they carry. Demon servitors, things that should not exist, do. They are the broken offspring of desperation, madness, and ambition, born from a galaxy where every law of decency has long since been overwritten by the arithmetic of survival. They are the final embodiment of a truth the Imperium refuses to admit, that in the end there are no taboos in the Warhammer galaxy, only costs. These constructs, forged from the remnants of humanity and the essence of the warp, tell a deeper story than any data file or propaganda broadcast ever could. They are the fossil record of humanity's slow moral extinction. A log of its compromises, its rationalizations, its belief that just one more sin, one more sacrifice, might be the key to victory. And as they march, as they toil, as they bleed demonic ichor into the cogitator hubs of decaying cities, they remind us that the line between survival and damnation has long since dissolved. We cannot speak of these servitors as isolated incidents. They are the physical manifestation of the Imperium's hypocrisy, a regime that preaches purity while weaponizing corruption, that claims to defend the soul while feeding it to the furnace, that raises statues to martyrs and then grinds the bodies of the faithful into mindless labor machines. And now, in the Demon Servitor, it has created a new icon, the unholy union of utility and horror. There is no future where these creations fade into obscurity. They are not aberrations, they are precedents, blueprints, the start of something larger. Already, whispers spread of Forge worlds experimenting with warp-reactive circuitry, of tech priests who chant canticles in reversed Binaric, of inquisitors who command silent thralls with flickering halos and burning eyes. And the longer the galaxy burns, the more likely it becomes that demon servitors will not be the exception, but the standard. In the grimdark future, technology is no longer a matter of innovation. It is a matter of control. Who controls the machine? The man who built it, the spirit bound within it, or the demon that feeds on it? The answer may no longer be simple or even relevant, because what matters most is that the machine still functions, that the war continues, that the Imperium survives another day. But the cost is written on the walls of shrines gone dark, on the faces of tech priests who no longer dream in data, but in blood, on the servitors who twitch when they pray, and whose prayers open doors no one dares to close. So yes, the Adeptus Mechanicus may well have fused humans with demons, and the real horror is not that they did it, it's that it worked. If you found this exploration into the darkest corners of Warhammer lore intriguing, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the forgotten, the forbidden, and the horrifying truths that lurk beneath the surface of the 41st millennium. For the Emperor, or what's left of him,